Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me, and this week's guest, the founder of Strategy Ladders. Did I get that right?
Did.
Awesome. Brian Smith, and we're going to talk today about all things entrepreneurship and just see where this conversation goes. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your company.
Absolutely. I'm Brian Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Strategy Ladders. We are a holistic consultancy for B2B service businesses. That means that we basically help address any and all problems that you're going to encounter as you go through the growth of your B2B service business. And that's everything from agencies to software development shops to even we work with property management companies, virtual restaurant companies, the wide range of B2B service businesses.
You said something that I love right off the bat, and that's the holistic part. I love an integrated system. One of the things I see often that, in my opinion, is a mistake for owners is they try to hodgepodge things together. And when it's not, again, a holistic system, something integrated, I think you lose a lot of efficiency. And I think you can find yourself going down some roads that wind up becoming cul-de-sacs.
Absolutely. So I think we have to think about how people even enter into consulting in the first place, enter into a consulting relationship, I should say. They have some sort of pain in their business. And the biggest mistake that business owners make is they think that the pain is also the source of the problem. So one of the most common things that we'll see, for instance, is someone that says, "Oh, I've got a total mess in my operations. I need you to come in and help me with my operations." And so then we'll say, "Okay, cool. We see it's a mess, but what is it that you're selling?" "Oh, well, we create a custom offer for every single one of our clients, and we really try to adapt to our clients' needs." And then we say, "Okay, so what you're saying is every single client is different and you don't have any sort of consistent offer." "No, not at all." "Okay, so it sounds like the problem isn't operations, it's actually your offer." So then we switch over and we focus on the offer. We standardize the offer. We figure out how to, sort of the back of the envelope way that we do this is we want to get to where the offer is going to be 80% consistent and then 20% customization for the client to make sure it's really what they need. And once you do that, now you have something that's actually scalable. And if we fix that, nine times out of 10, we fix the operations problems, and then we can actually move into what the next set of problems will be once we've solved that particular issue.
That's awesome. In a former life, my very first company, Influence Understood, I did a lot of sales training and fractional sales management. And I can't count how many times an owner would come to me and say, "We have a sales problem." And 5 minutes into the conversation, it was clear it was a leadership problem. In my experience, 99 out of 100 times, it's a leadership problem. But point being, and you brought it up masterfully, where the pain manifests isn't necessarily where the problem is. It's just where you can see it. And compounding that problem, very often because of our biases and our own business development, we see it where it really isn't anyway. Never mind where it manifests, but we just see it, it's a sales problem because we believe our sales team is bad, or we believe our sales team has challenges. So we heap every issue on them.
Absolutely. And that actually leads a bit to that leadership issue because a big piece, and when we say we're a holistic agency, one of the key things that we do is we approach consulting the way that a business owner or a CEO should approach their business, right? It's that you're basically solving one problem after another after another. In business, you never get rid of problems. If you have no problems, you have a really, really big problem, right?
Yeah.
And so
I was going to say the only way to get rid of the problems is to shut down the business.
Exactly. The problems only end when you're dead. And
Yeah.
so if you continue to solve one problem after another, you're dealing with what we call higher and higher quality problems, right? A sales problem is a lower quality problem than a capacity problem, for example. And so as we're going through and we're solving one problem after another, we then are thinking like a CEO. So we're having to sit side by side with that founder. And it's also why we only work with the founder and their senior leadership team. We will never work in a situation where somebody says, you know what you're doing is great. My management team needs this, not me. Because the leadership is what creates these problems. But it also moves into a portion of what we do is mindset as well, because we see people get stuck in, for instance, that myopic view of this is where the problem is, and they can go through their business saying, oh, I'm seeing a problem in sales, so it's a sales problem. I'm seeing a problem in ops, so it's an ops problem. And we've all seen this oftentimes happens in larger corporate entities as well, where they're too siloed, so they're trying to solve everything within each silo, and they're not really growing at that point. They just have small incremental growth. What we try to do is come in and fundamentally change the organization, but to do that, we have to solve the problems where the source of the problem is. But then oftentimes the source of the problem is that, 6 inches between that founder's ears that's creating the problem.
I couldn't agree more. I can't remember if it was Zig Ziglar or Brian Tracy that coined that most important real estate is the 6 inches between your ears. Whoever did it was right. And then the second thing, Ben Franklin said, fish rot from the head down, and so do organizations, and he's also right. So you see a lot that I'd like to unpack. The first one, obviously, is leadership. It sounds like we're in alignment. Every organization I've been a part of that has a problem, the problem starts with the leader. And I think it's important to point out, it doesn't make them a bad person or a bad leader. It means they've got a weakness or a deficit that needs addressing. And if they've got the maturity to accept that and grow, then they're going to keep growing. If they don't, then that peak that they've hit for their company is probably going to become a plateau at best, if not start going back down. So,
yeah. Well, and let me build off of that, because when you're in a leadership position, you're a leader. And you're probably a good leader. You just may be leading people in the wrong direction. So we'll see this a lot of times when founders are saying, oh, I've got this person who's just a really bad leader in this role. The issue is not that they're a bad leader. It's that they're representing all of the things that you don't want them to represent. And so oftentimes when, especially in business and really anywhere, true leadership comes down to the willingness and ability to disrupt the status quo. But to do that requires sometimes such a mind-bending shift from what has been safe for that organization, for that leader, for that founder, that we spend a lot of time dealing with that mindset issue of, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. Well, if you don't rock the boat, you're not going to get anywhere. The people who don't rock the boat, guess what? They're average. They're mediocre. They stay that way. And so if you want to be a leader,
smooth seas don't make great sailors. That boat's got to rock if people are going to grow.
Exactly. I'm very fond of the story of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot. The story of the who was it? The oracle had tied a ox cart to a stake and said, whoever releases the ox cart is going to go on to conquer Asia. And there's all these different soldiers and strong men and wise men and all these different people coming and trying to untie the knot. Well, Alexander comes over and he takes one look at the knot, whips out his sword, and whoosh, just slices it, releasing the ox cart. And he goes on to conquer Asia, just as the oracle had predicted. While the people were still sitting around saying, well, he shouldn't have done it that way. It was supposed to be untied. It was supposed to. He disrupted the status quo in such a way, created such an uproar that people were still talking about how he fulfilled the prophecy. Well, he went out and actually did the work and became Alexander the Great as we know today. And I think that is one of those things that when you think about, another one of my favorite phrases is never give a sword to a man who can't dance. Because leadership, and if you really want to advance, it's first you have to learn the rules, right? Whether it's the tango or the waltz or the bachata, if you don't know the rules, and you definitely can't do the dance. But if you only strictly follow the rules, you look robotic and aren't actually dancing. You have to learn which rules to break, where the flourish is. And so if you don't understand it that well, then having that power of the sword, that cutting, that ability to disrupt the status quo is a dangerous, dangerous tool. So a lot of what we do is we like to work with clients that have some experience so that they understand the rules well enough. And our job is to figure out which ones to break. Because once you figure out which ones to break, which status quo to disrupt, that's true leadership right there. That is the art of leadership.
100%. We had the exact same philosophy in martial arts, where as a beginner, the expectation is that you learn the techniques rote and you mirror them back exactly. No difference, no anything. Everything is the same. And you do that until you've internalized that technique to the point that you understand why and how and when it works at a fundamental level. Once you've absorbed it to that point and the technique is yours, then you know what things to change for different situations and scenarios. So we begin with a beginner's mind. We evolve to a point where we truly understand things at a deep muscle level, and then we make it our own, and then we go back to the beginner's mind again.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same philosophy. And you said something in the first section I want to talk about, and you brought it up here again. So now I feel forced to do it. And that's the nature of problems. One of the difficult things about leadership, and I can understand this because I experienced it myself too, is you break through that next level and you think things are going to get easier. You're like, oh, I've resolved all these problems. I've hired those folks. I've got that infrastructure now. I don't have to focus on everything myself. But the problems don't go away. Their nature and their flavor does. And very often, and I think you'll have some insightful points on this, very often they're what you didn't expect and things that you're not really ready for yet. And that necessitates, that additional learning and that beginner's mind as a leader. I think you're not expecting problems to get bigger. You're expecting them to get smaller. And what got you to that point isn't necessarily what's going to get you to the next point. And
Exactly.
that old, what brought you here won't get you there saying. I don't know why I'm dropping so many sayings today, but I think that happens a lot in leadership. And I think it's why I know, again, in my old company, I worked predominantly with technology staffing companies. And fewer than 15% of technology staffing companies ever break the $10 million a year in revenue barrier. And the most frequent reason is what I just described. That person who started the company, they hit the wall of their development and didn't continue to develop. And so that becomes their ceiling.
And that's a huge thing. I mean, I think there's a number of different ways that we could unpack that. But, first and foremost, as you're growing a business, leadership and really just the responsibility of growing the business is, with it comes the understanding that it never gets easier. When you're carrying a $1 million company, that's easier than a 10 million, which is easier than 100 million. It's like going to the gym, right? Whether you're benching 45 pounds or 345 pounds, it's the same motion. But to get you to that point, there's a lot of different work that you're going to have to do, right? Like you're not going to be able to just show up and just do the same weight, the same thing every day. You've got to load up and take on more and more and more weight. Now, that's one aspect of it, because it comes down to your ability to handle responsibility and stress. That's a huge, huge piece of it. But then the other is understanding that, again, that mindset. I'll give one example that is very, very easy to go out and validate. It's something internally at our company, we call it the rule of 20. And it is that when you see a business that gets up to about 20 people, several things. Number one is, once they get up to about 20 people, you no longer can just lead the business through leadership. You move into a space of needing to manage. And the example I give with this is, if you think about inviting 15 friends over to a dinner, that's pretty easy, right? You can invite them over. Jerry, you sit over there. Susan, you sit over there. And everybody sort of self-organizes at that size. But if you invite 75, 150 or more people over, Now you actually have to manage the whole thing. People aren't just going to show up and be able to self-manage. You've got to have seating assignments. How is the food going to come out? Where are we going to put everybody's coats? Things like that. Now you've moved into the realm of management, and it's right around that 20 people that you cease to be able to just lead, and then you move into management. Another thing that happens at that level is oftentimes up to that point, you've got the founder saying, okay, what is the support I need? I'm spending too much time doing this administrative work, so I'm going to hire an EA. I'm spending too much time doing this particular aspect of service delivery. I'm going to hire this person. And so it's sort of 80-20ing themselves out of the business. But then once they get to this point, now they've reached the limit of what they can do to 80-20 themselves out. Now, the other thing that happens at this point is this is a little bit less of a rule, but it is a bit of a truism, which is if a business hasn't exceeded 20 employees in 2 years, chances are they won't, because momentum is the strongest force in business. So it's learning to keep that momentum, because once somebody gets into that mindset of, oh, okay, this stall is okay, they've adopted that new mindset. So there's a couple of different elements here, right? It's understanding that you have to change the way you think about things, change even the skill sets that you use, moving from leadership into management. And these plateaus happen again. It happens again around 45 to 60 employees. It happens again once you get a little over 100 employees. And a lot of this has to do with, first you're learning to manage, then you have to learn to manage managers, and then you have to learn to manage departments and so on. And it's a completely different way, not only of communication, but of trust within the organization. And some people frankly can't handle it. They'll do things to self-sabotage. They'll do things to slow this down. But it's understanding that there's certain elements that you want to keep consistent. Again, like that momentum. It's also the understanding that there's different skill sets, different strategies, and so forth that you have to constantly be bringing into the business. And another example that happens also even earlier in a business, ideally if they're going to grow, is that switch from who to how, or excuse me, from how to who. There's a great book by Dan Sullivan we give all of we recommend all of our clients read, which is Who Not How. And it's that shift from how do I do something to who can I bring in to do it? And obviously that mindset is tremendously different, because one is saying, oh, I need dashboards and other things so I can monitor, where all my processes are, to, okay, now I need a reporting structure, a managerial structure. How do I manage these people in my organization? So I'm sure we could go through many, many different paradigm shifts, but I'm trying to give some of those that are early on. And I think the vast majority of people that are going to be listening to this are going to have either experienced firsthand or seen themselves, because that rule of 20, you can log into Sales Navigator today and look at any business, like any B2B service business, and just search, and you're going to see there's a ton of businesses that are stuck between the 15 to like 22 employee mark, because this is where they stall out for these reasons.
Yeah, Vern Harnish talks in a similar way in his book Scaling Up. He uses revenue versus headcount, but the concept is the same. There's fundamental differences in how businesses operate at certain break points. And very often the old Peter principle, very often people get to the point where anything beyond that is beyond their ability, and they get stuck there. And, again, I think there's a level of maturity to recognize that. So, for example, the last job I held before jumping off onto the entrepreneur train, the owner grew the company to about $30 million a year in revenue, acknowledged that was his limit. He didn't really get how to go past that. And he brought in professional managers and professional leadership. And that company is well over $100 million company now. Because he was like, this is what I've got, and this is what I'm willing to give. And so he still owned the company. I'm sure he gave a little equity for some traction, but still his company, but he brought in people to do it for him. And I'm not saying that's always the right path, but for him it was.
Well, and you see that play out even in terms of how you hire. Cameron Herold talks about the double-double, which is you never hire somebody who comes from a business double the size that you're at. So twice the
Mhm.
size that you're at today. And that it's huge because what you'll see is there's such a skill mismatch when you do that. And you can bring in, I mean, how many times have you seen somebody who's got, a business that might be doing 10 or 20 million dollars, and they're super excited because somebody from Google or some other big name company wants to come work with them. And guess what? That person that comes in generally just fails miserably. They
100%.
overspend. They don't understand how to operate within that size and scale. So we can see it on the other end quite often, where you're bringing in somebody from outside, and almost without fail, that's an example of in the consulting and coaching roles that we take, where we kind of think of it as we're sitting shotgun, saying, hey Jerry, you're driving about 50 miles an hour towards a brick wall. You might want to slow down. Oh, you're accelerating. Oh, okay. Well, you might want to think about that. And one of those brick walls that we often have to tell clients about is hiring somebody from this massive organization that they look up to, because eventually when they hit that brick wall, then it's that moment where it's, ow, that really hurt. That didn't work out well. And I guess, frankly, the only upside to that is after that, you start listening to us a little bit more because you realize that we were right. But it's these mismatches that happen so often that it really proves itself out more times than I think people realize.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. My entire consulting business is creating destination employers. So it's to help companies create a reputation in the marketplace that people can go to 10x their careers. And when they achieve that, then they were able to attract, recruit, and retain the top talent in their markets on demand. So I 100% resonate with what you're saying. In the extreme example, startups typically prefer generalist players who can do multiple things. Maybe none of them exceptionally, but all of them well. Then as they grow and become more sophisticated, again, that 20, 50, 100 person company that you were alluding to earlier, as the company becomes more sophisticated, that generalist is no longer the best solution to a problem. They either need T employees with that depth in one or two areas and some width, or they just need flat, single, deep specialized folks. But if you take those specialized folks early on, if you take that Google person to a startup, they almost never work out, not just because they can't do all of the things that are described, but they're a bad cultural match. They come from a place where there's hyper defined job descriptions and everyone's role is crystal clear because they're used to working in a giant ant hive, not in this little loose collaborative environment. Um,
Dead
yeah.
dead on. And I would actually, let me circle that back to leadership, right? We were talking about how leadership is almost like a sword. It's a cutting action. It's disruption of the status quo. The
Mm-hmm.
reason that the founder is the founder, the CEO is the CEO, is not because they work harder than anyone else. It's because they have to make the tough decisions. And
Yes.
what you're describing is one of the tough decisions that really is a tipping point for a lot of businesses on whether or not they're going to grow to the next level or not. And it's that recognition that, hey, yes, this person may have been influential in getting you to this point, but there is no place in the business for them going forward. That
Mm-hmm.
generalist that you could depend on to do everything from get your laundry done to handling a client issue, they're great, but unless you want to have them as a personal assistant, which in reality, that's also a specialty once you get to that level, having
Mm-hmm.
an EA that actually knows how to work for you and actually knows how to support an executive. The reality is you have to decide, are you going to build your business around growth and where it needs to go in order to maximize its potential, or are you going to instead say, oh, we're a family, air quotes, and we're going to keep these businesses here and keep them small, or keep these employees here and keep us small, which in the end you're really not only hurting your business, hurting yourself, hurting the other employees, but you're also hurting that individual, because then they're not able to go out and find some place that they actually fit into and can help get that business to the next level and thrive in.
Couldn't agree more. I've been in this game for 25 years, and in that time, I will more than 25 now. I hate to admit, but I will say, without a doubt, I've seen far more bad matches than I have bad companies and bad people. Um,
Yeah.
90% of the time, either the person was never the right fit or they no longer are. And my philosophy when it comes to teammates is very simple. I'm going to give you 100% of my support until you show me you can't or won't do what it is that I hired you for. As soon as it becomes clear that either you're not able to or you will not do it, every minute after that is a waste of my resources. It's a burden to the team, and it's a waste of your time because you're never going to thrive here. There's no world where you're going to rock here. So all I'm doing is holding you back from finding the place where you're going to rock.
100%. And what I would add there, because where I see that fall apart, because what you described is an ideal scenario, but the
Mhm.
place that that falls apart often is the leadership themselves don't have full clarity on what it is that everybody should be doing because they haven't figured that out within their business. So especially when they're smaller, and when I say smaller, I'm talking, anywhere in the $20 million or lower size range, generally 30 to 50 employees or less as well. Um, what we'll see is that they're still just chasing revenue. And
Mhm.
so it's revenue, revenue, revenue. One of the tools that we use around this, just coming back to leadership, is, we ditch mission, vision, and all of that. And instead, we focus on the non-monetary measure of success. And this is not just a nice, way of saying we're not just in it for the money. This is actually a really, really hard hitting leadership tool that you can use and everybody in your organization can use. So it's that, what is that one outcome, that one thing that you can deliver again and again and again? And if you continue delivering that outcome or that solution to your clients, you're going to stay in business forever. In our business, it's freeing founders from operations. Our metric is the number of founders we free from the operations, sales, and management of their business. And we know if we continue to do that, we're going to stay in business forever. And the way that then works is, once you have that framework, another client of ours, they realized that even though they were a marketing agency, they kind of had two sides. One side was more like consumer focused. The other side was public policy focused. They decided, and they had a large, like a 9-person senior leadership team. They decided, hey, our measure of success is the number of laws that we directly influence the change of. So the number of laws that we directly impact the changing of. And so once they recognize that in that same call, it took them, 5 weeks to get to that point. And in the next 30 minutes, they're like, we need to fire these clients, these people, we need to hire these 2 people. Everything became clear. And it becomes that thing that every single decision in the business can go through the lens of, does this person, does this software, does this client help us accomplish more of this particular non-monetary outcome? It'll allow you to say no to a client who's a difficult client, because you're going to realize, there's no way in hell that we're going to be able to get them to that outcome. It's going to get you to say, hey, this person in our business is hindering our ability now to deliver that outcome more. But until you have that clarity, what you're discussing is really sort of, a laboratory example for a lot of businesses, because they don't have anywhere near that clarity to be able to understand, is this person helping or hurting us? It's just, hey, they're in here and we're kind of sort of increasing revenue at 5 or 10% a year, which for a small business is, frankly, really crappy. If you're sub 50 million and you're increasing at under 10% a year, you're going to have a hard time ever getting to that 9-figure number you're aiming for.
Yes. I want to circle back to something that you said earlier, because I think what you're talking about now goes back to that. And that's the management and leadership, while related, being two separate things. Leadership, you talked about it being a disruptor, and I agree. When I think leader, I think a charismatic, influential person who has the ability to through a variety of means, get people to follow their message and do what they want. A manager is somebody who can organize that into systems and processes that are repeatable and scalable. In my definition world, that's how I see the difference. But the thing that's funny is, If you look at social media, which is always a great idea, I say with all the sarcasm I can muster, managers are typically denigrated and leaders are put up on a pedestal. And to your point, and I agree, leadership is clearly very important, but the ability to effectively manage is as important.
Well, one of the reasons I think that you see managers denigrated is if you look at how people are promoted into management, in a huge variety of industries, they're promoted not because of their management ability, but because of some other ability. I came up in the investment banking space. You didn't get promoted to managing director because you were a great manager. You got promoted to managing director because you were delivering the most revenue. Like that was what was going on. That did not make you a good manager. I think we see that in tons of sales organizations. We see that in a lot of other organizations as well. So I think people also remember the
I
really
agree
amazing
100%.
managers. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that also comes from oftentimes the people in the leadership role don't really understand management, right? They just see somebody, oh, you're the top performer. So obviously that means like we have to advance you or we're going to lose you. So let's advance you into management. But being let's use sales, being a top salesperson and being a sales manager are dramatically different roles. And it ends up being, in fact, I have a client right now, they're well over 200 employees. They have a situation where that's exactly what they did. They moved their top salesperson into a sales role. Now they've had to create this kind of into a management role. And now they've created this sort of oddly shaped org chart because they've got their top salesperson leading the sales org, but then and they're still primarily doing sales. But then they've got all of these other sort of odd situations of management occurring underneath it just to be able to now not upset the apple cart and lose their top salesperson by moving them out of that role. So this is beyond common, but the challenge I think also is, frankly, we could get into a much more societal thing, which is, we try to highlight and we look at, even top entrepreneurs like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or folks like that, and we put them on a pedestal when in reality they are probably some of the most psychopathic individuals in our entire uh, society at this point. If they weren't billionaires and were having the impact on individuals that they have, then they would have been in jail a long time ago. But we have this way of just elevating leadership and we look up to it. I think it's fundamentally also not just a societal thing. It may be human nature. The managers are the ones that we all end up interacting with at some level, and because of that they're more accessible. We see their faults more clearly, and so I do think that more fundamentally that's why we break down management versus leadership in the way that we do. Is it fair? Probably not, but that's just the way that people work. And if we go back to that idea of never give a sword to a man who can't dance, you got to learn the rules. People are going to treat managers a certain way and top level leaders another way. Once you learn those rules, then you can learn how to use those to your advantage.
I think additionally, because managers, when done right at least, are essentially the people who ensure that you follow the systems and processes of the company, what they do is very definable and easy to understand and judge. Not necessarily easy to do, but easy to understand and judge. Whereas a leader, have you ever read the Dune series by Frank Herbert?
I haven't read the books, no.
Okay, so they're very different than the movies. So
Okay.
it's actually a cautionary tale against charismatic leaders. The whole point of his series is the danger of following charismatic leaders.
Interesting.
And it's interesting, especially when you go to that depth. But the thing about an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates or any of these guys is it's so easy to get sucked up in their culture personality, but it's difficult to describe at a nuts and bolts level the things they did that got them where they are. So you can't scrutinize them as readily as you can that manager. And to your other point, quick funny story, my very first time in a sales leadership role was extremely similar to what you described. I was the top salesperson in the office. I was personally out billings in the 7 bottom offices in the company combined. My manager said, "Hey, do you want to take a sales leadership role?" I said, "Sure." She handed me a box of business cards that said sales manager, and that was it. That was the beginning and end of any training, any direction, anything.
It's wild how that happens, and I think that you're spot on too. I mean, I think that it is so much more accessible. I mean, these are the people that you're interacting with. I often will tell people, management is something that can be learned. Leadership is something that is embodied. Leadership is something that if you even a manager, of course, is in a leadership role, but there's a very different when you think about a leader of an organization too. It's very different because that leader is I'll often use the example of think of someone like Christopher Columbus, who, for better or worse, he was a great leader that led people literally far beyond anything that they knew or could see. What he did is he told a story that was compelling enough to get a lot of money and then be able to recruit people to then literally sail what was potentially over the edge of the world. They went all the way far beyond the horizon. And that's really what the leader's role is, right? The leader's role is to get people to have faith to go beyond the horizon. And that's done through a multitude of things. It's done through storytelling. It's done in just purely how you conduct yourself. Because if a leader seems out of alignment, then how can you trust their stories, right? But
Yes.
if you can trust how they act day to day, minute to minute, and you can trust their decision making, even in the small things, that they're not a different person behind closed doors, then you can start to trust those stories. The difference then is that those managers are the ones that are making sure all of the different parts of the ship are working. They're not the ones pushing people over the horizon. They're the ones that also have bought into this story and then are helping to ultimately make it a reality by helping everyone work together. Now, we could move into how managers work versus how people think managers should work. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we do with our clients is shift their understanding of managers, and the fundamental role of a manager is to help ensure that the people that work underneath them are able to effectively do their job. Like it becomes that simple, and it's less about whether you're incentivizing or you're penalizing or however whatever you're doing within management. And it has more to do with facilitating their ability to do their job. And quite
100%.
often as well, like the founders, this is a big challenge with founder-led businesses. Founders are like, well, why do I need to give them feedback all the time? Like they have the job, they're working hard, they can see the business growing themselves, and because they're so used to being self-motivated and being able to see the small incremental changes in the business because they are so invested in it, they oftentimes don't recognize that, hey, even top performers, and in fact, especially top performers, need to have that constant feedback, need to have that constant management in place. And I think that's probably one of the biggest failures that we see. As somebody goes out, we're talking about hiring someone from Google or a top company, even a top performer that is a good fit within the organization. This is where we oftentimes see people fall flat. And it's, well, this guy's supposed to be a rock star. Why do I need to go pat him on the back? He knows he just closed, the biggest sale of the year. These top performers of anybody, the reason they're doing it is probably a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of insecurity. So you got to go make sure that you're feeding into that a bit in order to keep them around. Otherwise, they're going to get more insecure, and they're ultimately going to go somewhere else to find that security, and they may continue
Yes.
this cycle. But yeah, I think that's one of the hardest lessons that a lot of founder-led businesses do learn when hiring top performers.
Whenever I talk to a founder or any senior leader, especially if we're changing something in the workflow of the company, I tell them if they feel like they're communicating 2 or 3 times more than what they should, they're probably right around where they need to be.
It,
So
You're 100% on. I mean, when we start working on like processes and operations, we tell people, look, I know you want to work on processes and operations, but 80+% of your problems are just going to be solved through improving communication
Yeah,
every single
I'll tell
time.
you where I think that the ball gets dropped here is they forget something fundamentally human nature, and that's that we as humans tend to fill gaps in with negatives. So if I know that there's changes happening in my company and I either don't understand why, or I don't understand how it impacts me, or I don't understand how it's going to impact my ability to succeed, I start to get pessimistic and wonder, you know, is there a problem here? Gosh, another pop culture reference. Do you remember back in the 90s, the hit show X-Files?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chris Carter was the executive producer of that. And in the first few seasons, he didn't have anywhere near the budget he needed to pull off the special effects he wanted to make something legitimately scary. So the way that he got past that was lots of flashlight chases through the woods at night. We'd get a 1 second flash of something, just enough to give you an idea, and then you'd lose the picture and you'd fill in your mind whatever was most scary for you. Well,
Yeah.
that worked because that's the way people's brains are worked. We're wired to notice danger and fear because, that might be a T-Rex, that might be a mako shark, that might be something that's going to end me. We don't fill in puppy dogs and rainbows. So if that leader's not communicating through change, they're going to
Well,
reap an ugly harvest.
absolutely. And that actually, let me bring that back to something I mentioned earlier, which is that non-monetary measure of success can be so valuable in this. So I'll give a quick story of something that happened earlier this year. We acquired a marketing agency. And once I announced that to the team, about, I don't know, less than 24 hours later, the most junior person on our marketing team messaged me and said, the exact way that they phrased it was, I don't understand how this acquisition will help us free more founders. So sort of shorthand for our non-monetary measure of success. And in that moment, I knew I had dropped the ball because I hadn't fully described it. But what I want to point out is having something like that non-monetary measure of success implemented within your business gives everyone the framework to even ask the question, to challenge leadership and say, I don't understand how this connects. So it gives them the language to have that communication.
Yeah, so let me say I will agree that you dropped the ball in that aspect, but I'd also like to point out that you built a culture where the most junior person on the marketing team felt comfortable bringing something to the founder's attention. And
Yeah.
that's important. I teach the EFG leadership framework, and the E is for engagement. When people feel heard and valued, and they know that if they bring something up, it may not get executed on, but you're going to listen seriously and then talk to them about it, then you get what you just described, which is awesome.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we say internally all the time is if you see something, say something. And
Yeah.
so it's no matter who it is in the business, if they're doing something wrong, inefficiently, if there's something that you just simply don't understand how it relates to our measure of success, then it is on you to say something, because the way that we phrase it is if you don't say something, then that actually becomes your responsibility. You saw it, you had that perspective, but you didn't speak up, and that is a very selfish act in that moment then. And so we have people that will challenge us, or I have, take for example my EA who's been with me now maybe 7 months. At first she was a little uncomfortable doing that, speaking up as much as and being that empowered, but now it's to the point where I don't want to give all of her secrets away, but she'll bring up things and share insights that literally no one else in the business would have the perspective on, because she has access to all of my information and she sees it in a different way. And it just shows you how valuable letting literally anyone in the business speak up. So of course, sometimes there's noise that's created from this, but more often than not, it's actually identification of signal.
Yeah, I was going to say that type of noise tends not to obscure the signal; it tends to highlight the signal. And I would, even if it didn't, I would make that trade all day and twice on Sundays.
Yeah,
That's
a hundred
an
percent.
easy trade to make. I'd
It's
rather
been
too many birds chirping in my ear than just radio silence.
100%, and that's been vital in our organization's growth. I mean, I started this company literally dead broke, a little over 2.5 years ago now. Had We started from literally nothing, and we're mid seven figures and over 35 employees today. And a big part of that is because everybody is empowered. Every single person is empowered. And because of that, like a great example is I've never had to make the decision to fire someone. It's been made for me by the team because people will see that, hey, this person is not operating up to our standards. They're not showing up in the same way that we expect of our team. And I've never once let someone go where I haven't had at least 4 or 5 people come to me first and say, this is a problem. And it's not for my lack of awareness, but it's because people are so proactive in that they now sense who is a cultural fit and who is not.
And I'll tell you, that's awesome. I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with where I've engaged and it's been clear that somebody's just, for whatever reason, isn't working out. They shouldn't be there anymore. And I talk to the owner and I work them through it and they let the person go. And then the rest of the team is like, what took so long?
Yeah.
The team always knows because they're the ones who have to pick up the slack when the ball gets dropped.
It's 100%. And what it does is it helps reinforce to the people that truly are on your team, like deeply like committed to being on your team. It helps reinforce to them that you're there to support them, that you are there to actually make their lives easier. You are there to help them, advance, and ultimately you're not playing favorites in any way, shape, or form. And I think that the other thing that ends up occurring in organizations where people are this clear on the culture, it ends up then creating this sort of again, it's like a self-reinforcing culture, because I've helped clients implement this as well. And what ends up happening is a lot of the pressure ends up being taken off of the leader, because oftentimes what ends up happening is someone in my role would normally, with 35 employees, 37 employees where we're at now, normally I would have to be engaged in a lot of management in most organizations. But because of this empowerment, a lot of the team will self-manage. And yes, we have managers in place, but they self-manage. They report up. They say, hey, I'm seeing this issue. And the reason they see it is because as the team advances, now that this goes into a whole nother realm, but they see that as the team advances and improves financially, and overall just work conditions improve, it improves for everybody on the team. And so they fight for that, because at the end of the day, they see our commitment to our clients, they see our commitment to our team, and they know that we walk the walk. I mean, again, it's that leadership. They know that when I show up and say something, that I'm going to be honest with them. They know that I'm transparent. They know that what they see is what they get, well, 100% of the time, and they know it more than anyone. And I'm gonna give a little bit that you've probably seen me talking on LinkedIn about, but I think that that's one of the things that really differentiates consultants doing what we do versus a lot of these solo consultants that we see that might have 100,000 followers, because we can't lie. We can't make stuff up, because as soon as I do that, then I lose the faith and the trust of everybody on my team, and they're the ones to call me out. And so I think that's one key thing, that in building trust, I generally don't trust people that don't have at least a handful of people on their team, because it always seems like the smaller they are, the more wild their claims are. So, I've somebody who has a small team just talking about how they worked with over 100 clients in the last 12 months. How'd you have an impact on 100 clients with a team that small?
Exactly. And I'll tell you, and I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but a lot of the big influencers on LinkedIn who promote the solopreneurship mindset, which I have no inherent problem with, but
Yeah.
but when you dig into their solopreneurship, it's not true. They have teams. They have. It's just untrue. They outsource everything and they're managing 20 people. The difference is those 20 people are consultants in other groups and this and that, but they don't make $7.5 million in lifetime sales alone.
Yeah,
It's a
and
story.
oftentimes they don't make anywhere near the numbers that they're talking about
Right.
anyways. And, it's anybody that tells me that they're a solopreneur and they're happy with it, once you start talking to them about their exit plan, or you're talking to them about where they're trying to go, or, what happens when they take a vacation. At the end of the day, like we said earlier in this episode, momentum is the strongest force in business. And if you're willing to step away and let your sales fall flat for a week, 2 weeks, a month, you just killed all that momentum and now you're having to start up again. And once you do that a handful of times, you're going to realize that this dream of solopreneurship and not having anybody to manage is really just a pipe dream. And so I can leave it. I can leave you with this too, that one of the key things that we have to deal with in mindset shifts is people will often say, hey, I don't want to grow a big business because of my experience with this company, or my experience here, or the last business I built, I had some horrible employees and this happened. A big mindset shift is you can build whatever the heck you want. Entrepreneurs are really like 4D creators. We can create things in all different ways. And as soon as you recognize that you have the freedom to create the type of organization that you truly want to work in, then a lot of the resistance can step away. Then you realize, oh, wow, I really can, go from the freedom of solopreneurship and find a completely different type of freedom that actually is in a lot of ways more free. Again, you have to carry more stress in certain ways, but can be a lot more freeing to then build a much larger business. So don't let the past dictate the future.
I'll tell you, we're almost an hour in, but I'm going to plant the seed for a future talk. I think stress and anxiety within certain parameters get a bad rap. You don't
Yeah.
make swords by petting steel. You don't get bigger muscles by not going to the gym. Those things happen because you place yourself under stress and you grow with that stress. I think part of it is the culture that we've built where victimhood is somehow noble, but
Yeah.
stress and anxiety get a bad rap, again, within parameters.
Yeah, no, they definitely do, but I think the flip side is that, and yeah, we can go way into this on a future talk, but uh, the challenge is finding that middle path, right? Like I
Yes.
believe primarily in the philosophy of Taoism, and if you think of the middle way, it's like going to the gym, right? Like if you go in there and you go so hard and you blow yourself out, you end up just hurting yourself and damaging yourself, and you end up getting weaker as a result. It's finding
Yes.
just enough pain, just enough so that you're into that threshold that's probably farther than what you thought you could do, but definitely outside of your comfort zone. And so once you get outside of that comfort zone and you learn how to ride that, you recognize that that's actually like riding a wave. And once you get on that and you can ride that wave of discomfort consistently and you make friends with that discomfort, that's how you continue to grow every single day, because you're not growing by staying comfortable. Being
100%.
comfortable is the worst thing in the world.
I think retreating to comfort to rebuild is okay. You just can't live there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, because the growth happens outside, no argument. But listen, we're an hour in. So I definitely would love to have you back on the show if you're down for
Awesome.
it. To
Definitely.
wrap up, we talked a lot about leadership and management. That was definitely the focus of our talk today. What thoughts would you leave an earlier stage entrepreneur who's looking to get to these, heck, to the 7-figure, 8-figure, never mind 9-figure? What advice would you give them as it relates to leadership and management?
So as it relates to leadership, I would remind you that a couple of things. How you do anything is how you do everything. So you've got to just keep showing up. Motivation is an excuse. So your job is to display discipline. And if you're
Yeah.
not disciplined, no matter what, you will not have a disciplined team. You will not grow your business. Now, as far as management goes, the other thing that I would point out is, a big part of management is how you build your team. And what you need to look at is, are you building the team that your business needs today to operate, or are you building the team that your business needs to grow to become an 8 or 9-figure business? And so from a managerial standpoint, I would be looking at, how do I build the team that my business needs to get to the next level? Far too often we have people that get stuck because they feel unmotivated, they're undisciplined, and they're just hiring the people that they need today. They're not pushing themselves to go through the hard work, do the work that they need to, no matter what, and then pull in the types of people that are going to challenge them to continue to grow as well.
Yeah, discipline starts where motivation ends. That's the thing, a lesson that needs to be learned there. What you talked about, literally, I wrote a book about that. That's the heart of Destination Employer, is about building highly effective teams. I completely agree. So that was awesome. Where can people find you? What's the best way to find where you're at and get in touch?
So best places are, you can find me at my website, strategyladders.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only S. Brian Smith on LinkedIn. And other than that, you can also find me on Instagram if you want to see Instagram and YouTube if you want to see my a little bit more uncensored side of what I share on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I will include all of those handles and all those locations in the show notes, so that anybody who's listening to the audio can go there, or anybody on the YouTube channel can catch them there. So I thank you very much for coming on, Brian. It was great. We definitely have to roll this back and do it again.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Jerry, and I look forward to next time. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. It was great.
All right. Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.